Hi there, welcome to my home. I'm Ryan LaSala, welcome to my infrequent YouTube channel, and I am here today to celebrate the paperback release of Reverie, talk about what it's like to be me, a queer author writing queer fiction for teens, and I don't know, maybe I'll make a joke, who knows? I am trying to get better at making YouTube videos. The fact of the matter is that I record quite a bit of, I record like everything, and then I sit down to edit, and much like the parents in any young adult fantasy, my motivation dies. Is that too specific? I feel like that's too specific of a joke. Anyways, so today is the day before Reverie comes out in paperback, and for anyone who doesn't know, Reverie is my debut novel. It came out in 2019, and it coming out in paperback is a pretty significant event to me, the author. And so I wanted to make a quick video, honestly more for like myself than like publicity reasons, just talking about like, you know, my experience watching this book find its readership, what it's been like publishing during a pandemic and sort of starting a career during a pandemic, and what it's been like watching my book get banned, all of that stuff. So that's what this video is going to be. I don't expect it to be like particularly coherent, and like full disclosure, I literally just did this video. I recorded everything and then I went up to like go see how the footage looked and if I looked hot, and discovered that I had not pressed record on my camera. So we are doing this for the second time. If I seem like Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove when she gets turned into like an upset cat, that's why. All right, let's talk. So this is gonna be a spoiler-free video. I'm gonna try to keep this mostly about like the response to the book rather than the actual content in the book. However, for my diehards out there, as part of celebrating the release, and because it's Pride Month, I am planning to announce a series of events that are gonna be sort of like a read-along book club style type thing, where we definitely can get into the specifics of this book. So if you've got questions, save them. I will be kind of going through that and announcing details on it soon. All right, so like, what is Reverie? Reverie is my debut novel. It came out with this cover in 2019, published by Source Books, and it is a young adult fantasy, like urban fantasy book about Kane Montgomery right here. And Kane Montgomery is someone who wakes up at the beginning of the book without his memories. He actually thinks they've been stolen from him, and he's got to piece together what's going on or what happened in his life leading up to this like cataclysmic event. And shortly after he wakes up, reality starts to kind of like unfold around him, and these dreamt worlds called Reverie start encroaching upon his suburb. And he meets a drag queen sorceress, and he meets people who say that they're his friends that have like really incredible powers, and Kane's got to figure out what to do with all of this information while trying to stop reality from just coming apart at the seams. Now, the main character in Reverie, Kane, is queer. There are other characters in the cast that are queer, and the villain is a like drag queen sorceress. And so the book is like pretty fucking gay, okay? Now, at the time when Reverie was coming out, like, I knew that it was sort of like an anomaly in just the fact that like a book with like so much like, not just queer characters representation, but sort of like queer theory, you know, being built into it. I was sort of amazed that like that was getting like greenlit by all of these like big organizations. But like now, as like a veteran author who has 2 books out, I like look back on this and I'm like, I'm baffled. Okay, like what do I mean by this? Okay. Reverie was supposed to come out in January, shortly before the pandemic. It came out in December because Barnes & Noble made it their young adult YA book club pick, which is like a really significant thing, right? Like it got like one of these stickers. This is like an exclusive edition, and I got to do a bunch of like special art for it. Hold on, let me show you. Like literally drew this and it got published in a book. Crazy. But it wasn't just Barnes & Noble, like Amazon and like Target and all the indies was on like the Indie Nexus. Like it made its way into like all of these like kind of like big honors, if that makes sense, and was like slated to be like a big book, right? Like a mainstream hit. And then the pandemic happened. Now, I don't love blaming things on the pandemic, because the fact of the matter is that like many books came out like right before or during the pandemic and like, you know, had like, you know, were huge hits on the New York Times bestseller list, like all that fun stuff. And you know, the other reason I don't like to necessarily talk about like my relationship as an author with the pandemic is because Reverie technically came out before the pandemic, and I got to do a bunch of stuff, like go on tour, go to conferences. I went on 2 tours. I went on like a domestic tour. I went overseas for a tour as well, and actually got back on like, I think it was like March 3rd, like very shortly before like the borders closed. So like I was really, I really did the maximum amount possible right before everything sort of shut down. So I got to do a lot, and I'm very like grateful for all of that. But like, I don't think anyone would disagree with me that like I would have gotten to do a lot more with this book had I been able to like tour once the book was actually out, right? Like in the publishing world, so much marketing is focused on like pre-release because they see like that first week of sales is like very crucial. But like from a consumer perspective, like most consumers don't pre-order books. They sort of find out about books in the world, after the book comes out, and the world just like, it didn't exist for months and months and months when bookstores were closed right after Reverie came out. So I will always feel a little cheated, but I will always also take stock of the fact that I got to do a ton, and I should be grateful. I should be grateful. And, ultimately, I'm sitting here on the eve of the paperback release of this book, which is something that not a lot of books get, and I should be grateful for that too. So like clearly, if the pandemic really snuffed out like, the momentum of my career, like I somehow grown centipede legs and scampered out from under that smothering force to live again in a new form. I don't know where this metaphor is going. I guess what I mean is that despite the odds, like a phoenix, stop it! No more metaphors. What I'm trying to say is that I'm happy that we are here. We being you and I, but also like Kane and I. It very well could have not been the case because of the anomaly that Reverie was, sort of the big risk that it represented to like publishers in the marketplace, and then all of that stuff sort of being knocked over and sort of proving that like maybe it wasn't worth it, right? Like, but it was, clearly. Okay, all right, I'm sorry, I need to hydrate. Okay, so Reverie has been out for years at this point, and I've gotten like all manner of responses to this book. It turns out this book was like pretty polarizing. Like people either like really loved it or really didn't. And I think that's great. Kind of that was the point, right? Because like, just to go back a little bit, I started Reverie in high school, and I started it in response to the fact that like there was just this total void in the shape of a queer person in like every imagined world that I was reading. Like The Hunger Games, Twilight, like all these big books were absent of queer people. So I was like, I'm gonna write my own story. I'm gonna write a story that like is full of all like the gay stuff that I like. There's gonna be a drag queen sorceress. There's gonna be like bejeweled statue monsters. There's gonna be like multi-genres. And I don't know that I necessarily understood this at the time, but like even Kane as a main character, someone with the ability to kind of like hop through all these dreamt worlds that then has to participate in like different genres, that's kind of subversive, right? Like you've got a queer character that is existing in all of these different types of adventures where queer people are traditionally not seen, right? That to me felt really cool, and like no wonder, because I was trying to fill in for this like hunger that I had had my entire life. So that's why I wrote Reverie, right? It was to sort of satisfy a very personal need. But I didn't write it just for me, because eventually the goal as I aimed to publish it was to also take into account like other queer people that would enjoy this. So that's really, who the book ended up being for, right? It was for queer people, teens of course, but also queer adults that never had this when they were teens and maybe were looking to kind of cover a lot of ground in one book. Now, I'm lucky enough that Reverie found such a wide audience that it managed to grow past, the circle of my own like influencer interest. But of course that then means that it eventually is going to end up in the hands of people that like, it wasn't necessarily intended for. And that's okay. I mean, I want to be read as an author. I want this book to have as big of a readership as possible, but it also means that, as an author, I can't anticipate every single response, especially if it's from people that are coming at this with like no familiarity with the kind of stuff that I'm writing about. But I think those reviews are interesting too. And like, I get tagged in these things too. And unlike most authors, like my relationship with like reviews and with Goodreads is that I actually really enjoy seeing like a variety of opinions, because ultimately, I understand that when people are like reacting to a book like Reverie, they're telling you about their experience reading it, and they're not necessarily sitting down with the aim of like critically and like analytically dissecting the book and deciding whether or not it was successful at what it set out to do. I know that Reverie was successful at what it set out to do, because what it was set out to do was entertain me. And it did. It did that. It was also, you know, aimed at like helping queer people, and I've seen it do that too. So I don't necessarily like harbor any ill will to people who like don't like it or who are like adamant that it's like horrible. Like, no, that's fine. That's okay. What I do think is interesting is that like there's a chasm between the people that like really understand Reverie, like really get it, and those that like don't at all, that like really like even like despise Cain, the main character. Like that was a big thing in the reviews. And that chasm, sort of that like those very separated camps, kind of map well to like queer readers, and then like adults who like read YA and are like straight. I don't know how to say this. I don't want to get in trouble, but basically like the girls that get it, the girls that don't. It's sort of that vibe. And I don't say this to be like churlish or dismissive of the people that like don't like my writing or like that didn't get it, but it is very fascinating to me as an author to sort of watch that like, you know, basically queer people kind of did understand what I was putting down. Oh, you know what? Maybe an example will help illustrate this. So this isn't spoiling anything, but in Reverie, the villain is a drag queen sorceress. Her name's Posey, and she appears really early on in the story. I think it's like the second chapter, and she presents to Cain as sort of this like potential mentor. And Cain, who doesn't know who to trust, doesn't have any friends, who's like completely just in the wilds of loneliness, decides to trust Posey, this you know, conspicuously queer person. I even think like conspicuously queer is like used in the book. This like visibly queer person who shows up and says like, let me help you. And of course, like, you know, the book is marketed with the drag queen sorceress villain angle, I guess. And so like we as readers, like we know that like there's some red flags here. Like don't trust them, Cain, right? Like that's the whole point of that scene, is that we're watching sort of a deal with the devil, you know, if you will. Not that Posey is the devil. I mean, that's also sort of a point later in the book, but whatever, not the point of this discussion now. But the point is that we're watching Cain make a mistake, maybe. And a lot of people in reviews like couldn't understand how Cain could make such a mistake. But a lot of people did understand. Actually, and a lot of people ended up being like, I like Posey, screw Cain, like I want a book about like Posey. Like that's how magnetic Posey, like a villain, ended up being. But like here's what I'll say about that. If you were not a young queer kid growing up completely alone, completely isolated through the dimension of your queerness, right? You probably don't understand the experience of just in a single moment glimpsing a queer adult, someone who's visibly queer. You know, maybe they've got like dyed hair, maybe they're dressed really interesting, and just seeing that person, it just totally cracks open your reality and introduces you to a much wider world of existence. You're seeing that you could have a future, and you're seeing that you could grow beyond the circumstances that are surrounding you now. Suddenly, your reality becomes not just reality, but purely a circumstance that you're currently and temporarily within. And there's something so magnetizing about that person. And every queer person I know, no matter what their upbringing was, can reference when they got to see that future through a person, when they got to meet that person or see them from afar, and like, you know, how much it mattered to them to know that they would exist as an adult. And that's what Posey means to Cain, right? Like that's the whole point of that like second chapter. So all of this to say is that like I've noticed some trends in the responses, and I find it to be really interesting. And, you know, I don't think that I'm free of blame here, right? Like I'm not saying that like straight people simply don't get my work. What I've learned as an author is that Reverie, despite its like ostentation, is actually kind of too subtle when it comes to stuff like this. Like often when I should be really obvious about like the mechanics of what's happening, even for the benefit of my queer readers, right? I sometimes like, I think in like the writing of this book would like shy away for fear that it would be alienating. And what I've learned in my subsequent books, Bedazzled and then The Honeys, which isn't out yet, is that it's worth sort of hitting people over the head with this and then expanding upon that idea so that, you know, queer people feel seen and validated, but also people coming to it from a different lived experience can learn something in a really like direct way and understand why these decisions are made the way that they are. Anyway, so the response to Reverie, very polarizing, very interesting as an author, but ultimately I feel really kind of excited that the book has sort of grown beyond, right, like just like the small amount of people that I wrote it for. And ultimately, like, it doesn't necessarily change how I feel about the book. Reverie really did do what I wanted it to do, and for that I'm like very proud. Basically, the goal of Reverie when I wrote it at the time was just self-satisfaction. But the goal of publishing it, of actually like finding an agent and publishing the book, was to sort of launch my own career, obviously, to debut. And the choice to sort of start with Reverie or to go with something else did come up a few times. Reverie is like, and this is not me bragging, it's a very ambitious book, just the nature of the book and sort of the themes that it covers, but also the fact that it like hops through a bunch of different genres. Like if you've read it, you know that like there's a very wide range of things kind of covered in the book, and that's why I call it an ambitious book. And like maybe I would have been wiser to sort of shelf this, start with something else, and, you know, write Reverie like later when I'm more mature as a writer. But I didn't do that, and ultimately, like, I'm glad that I decided to publish this first, because it's ended up defining me as an author in a really interesting way. Like now when people come to me in like the industry, if I'm like, you know, like pitching something new, like people know that I like write these like really like wild and fantastical stories. People know that I have a really wide range of capabilities when it comes to writing. I mean, like Bedazzled, my second book, no fantasy whatsoever. It's a contemporary romance. And then The Honeys, my third book, is horror. So I basically demonstrated through publishing like kind of a really strange first book that I can do a lot of different things, and that's benefited me. It's given me a lot of opportunities as an author for things that I can't even like announce yet. And that's what I wanted. I mean, there are so many different stories that I want to tell and so many different types of books that I want to write that it feels, I guess, appropriate that I started with a book that covers such a wide range, and it feels like I can really grow in a bunch of different areas. And I don't know that that necessarily would have been true if I had started with something that was like very traditionally fantasy or very traditionally like horror or something like that. Also, Reverie is so overtly queer that I think it's at a standard that like if I can do that right, and if that can sort of bring in readers, then publishers are going to give me a lot more freedom to write like very queer characters, take queer themes, and like do a good job with them. I don't know, I use the word good with some skepticism because I think that's like pretty subjective, but the fact of the matter is that because I've sort of proven myself with a book like this, right, because it sort of remains to be this like book that people adore and read and recommend, I feel like it's kind of given me a lot more leeway to even push myself further with talking about like my own queer experience through the prism of fiction. Now, the other response that is worth touching upon for Reverie, and this is kind of a newer one, is that it keeps getting banned. I'm sorry to like laugh about this. It's actually a very serious topic. But it's funny to me because basically people are putting together these lists of books that they're claiming need to be pulled out of school libraries because they are like deeply age inappropriate, they're pornographic, they're brainwashing, and like anybody who's like read Reverie or Bedazzled knows that that's like very much not the case. So I don't know, it's just like, it's so strange. And I've been like interviewed about this. I was on TV for it. I like talked about it a few times through social media. Twice a week or so, I'll get a text from someone being like, "Oh, like, did you see this article? Like, you're on this list, both of your books. Congratulations." And that's the weird part. It's that I keep getting congratulated for this. Now, I understand what people like mean when they say congratulations. They're basically like saying congratulations, like you are now part of this like elite scandalous group of authors or, you know, of published works that have been banned by like conservatives, and these books, you know, they tend to sort of have a boost in profile after, right? Because they're forbidden, and that draws people to them, and it boosts sales, and like, wow, like, congratulations, you're pissing off the right people. And I agree with that second part. Like, I do feel good that like my books have managed to like worm their way into the minds of these people that like do see them as a threat, because they kind of are a threat to the worldview that like queer people shouldn't exist. So yeah, I am fighting against that, and I do feel like I deserve a congratulations from like these people feeling threatened by that. But the fact of the matter is that like simply banning a book does not just like automatically sell copies. It's only a very small amount of banned books that kind of end up getting this boon behind them. And for the rest of the books, you know, for the rest of us, we're actually flirting with oblivion, right? Like there's the real chance of like forced obfuscation when we are deshelved, and when that becomes a trend specifically. And so I don't know, it mostly worries me. Now I do accept the congratulations because like of course I do, I'm me, but I sort of choose to like accept it from the dimension of like, Ryan, your books are like so gay that they sort of pose themselves as like an automatic threat to these people that are just purely combing the stacks for like queer books. And also, you know, books that are like popular, right? Like the fact of the matter is that like if I didn't have the readership that I had or the distribution that I had, that I probably wouldn't be like an auto ban on so many of these lists. But because I do, because I'm, you know, popular enough, right? Like I do sort of pass through that threshold of like potentially being like a risk or being pervasive enough that I need to be like investigated. So like, I don't know, like that's kind of cool, I guess. Anyways, I guess I should thank Reverie though for kind of launching such a queer career that I am now sort of a like auto ban to these people. Anyways, that's quite enough of that. Let's do a Q&A. So these are some of the questions that I got when I posted that I would be answering questions on Insta. What was your favorite scene to write in Reverie? It would have to be Kane versus the giant bejeweled spider fight in the ballroom, which again, this like doesn't really spoil anything, but that does happen at one point. And I remember writing the scene because I was sitting on a beach. I was on a family vacation, sitting on a beach under an umbrella in a Speedo with my noise canceling headphones on, just like furiously revising because the book was due and I really didn't like what originally was sort of in the scene. I think like it was just like a regular statue for this particular fight, but I remember thinking like, what is like the coolest, like most outrageous like thing that I could think of, and that's what gave birth to like that whole sequence with like those particular monsters in the book. And to this day, I think that they're like the coolest thing I've ever created. Is there an audiobook? Yes. Narrated by the incredible Michael Crouch, so check it out. How does it feel to see this book take on its own life from inception to now? Well, first of all, we don't use the word inception in this household. I remember when Inception was like announced, and I remember like going to go see it with this feeling of like complete dread, because I had already like thought of the idea for Reverie, and then to learn that something was being created at such a high budget with people that are like sharing dreams that slowly like come apart, I was devastated. I was truly like, oh my God, Christopher Nolan has like spies, like a nanny cam. I interviewed every single stuffed animal, being like, who's the nanny cam? Who told him? But then I remember watching the movie and like walking out and being like, phew, that was terrible. I really like the movie, but the fact of the matter is I'm no longer threatened by it. So I guess we can use the word inception. Okay, sorry. Anyhow, your question. How does it feel to see this book take on its own life? Kind of like betrayal, actually. So Reverie was like mine for 10 years, right? It was like an imaginary friend and sort of this like psychic companion to me for so long that when I finally like put it out into the world and like gave it away, when I like finished it, I remember feeling like, oh my God, like you can exist without me. And that there's like this moment of like, oh my God, like I remember feeling like betrayed. And there's just something so weird when something that is so precious to you starts to become precious to other people, and you sort of have to like, you detect this like territoriality within yourself that like, you know, you've just gotta give that up so that you can give it away. And of course, like, I totally love that Reverie has become a very precious thing to so many different people, but like, you know, it took me a long time to kind of grieve that it was no longer just mine, because it was just mine for so long. But now, of course, I sort of rejoice in the fact that like it, you know, belongs to so many of us. But yeah, I think that the feeling that I had at first was kind of a negative reaction to sharing it, and now I'm laughing at myself about it. What is the most special moment so far since Reverie's release? The paperback, duh. I mean, look, something that you may not know is that not every book makes it into paperback. At least within like traditional publishing, like young adult fantasy, like hardcover is the way that most books get made. And then if they do well, or if the publisher feels like they'll basically be able to profit off of like repackaging the book and like, you know, putting new cover on it, all of that fun stuff, then they'll put it out in paperback. But it has to, you know, have done well enough. And so seeing the book be turned into paperback and getting to sort of enjoy the fact that it'll have the second life, to see this like glorious new cover, like that's really exciting for me. And I like cannot wait, because it sort of feels like the book is coming out all over again, right? Who would win in a season of Drag Race, Posey or Anne Hathaway? This person asks an Anne Hathaway themed question every time I solicit questions from the internet, so I knew this was coming. I knew it. The answer is Anne Hathaway, because Posey is way too powerful and way too stubborn to like abide by the rules of a reality TV competition. I mean, like tearing down reality seems to sort of be the only thing Posey likes doing, so I don't think they'd do well. I think they would get kicked off. But Anne Hathaway has that like people-pleasing like theater kid thing going on, and I think would absolutely excel at a reality TV show like RuPaul's Drag Race. Do you ever see Reverie having a film or TV adaptation? Honestly, yeah, I think so. Someday. There were talks about this when the book was first coming out. Everything shut down in Hollywood, and there haven't been any like recent talks about it, but I'm really hopeful, because I think Reverie is like very ripe for some sort of adaptation. It's like a pretty robust property that could go into a lot of different formats. I personally would love to see it adapted into animation, but if I met like the right director or the right producing team and I really like their vision, then like I think that would be wonderful, and I would love to see what someone else would do with an adaptation. Will you ever cosplay as Posey? Because please, to be honest, I feel like the him cosplay that I wear is kind of like cosplaying like Posey, because so him is from the Powerpuff Girls. He's this like very like gender non-specific, like queer Satan type drag character. I don't know, they're hard to describe. But I remember seeing him as a kid, absolutely adoring that character and loving like the element of like queer chaos and villainy that they represented. And I think a lot of that made it into Posey as a character. So when I'm dressing up as him, I feel like I am kind of embodying a lot of like why Posey's the way Posey is. That said, that particular cosplay is from Bedazzled, so I feel like I do owe the world like a true Posey cosplay at some point. Will you... Oh, I can't ask that. That's inappropriate. Okay. Those are all the questions I'm going to answer. If I didn't get to your question, fear not, because I will be soon announcing a series of like readathon book club meetings specifically about Reverie, where I will answer anything else that I didn't get to do today. So before I wrap up, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. I think hopefully I've made myself clear that underpinning all of this, all of my reflections about a book like Reverie and the career that I've gotten to have because of it, is gratitude. Because at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's always been me and you, right? Like me and one other person on the other side of whatever I'm making, like interested in knowing what I'm going to say next. And I really can't describe how, you know, honored it feels to kind of have the readership that I have and to have the people in my corner that I have. Reverie is a book that, like, you know, by all accounts, shouldn't have even made it out into the world. I was told no so many times, and by people that, you know, understood what I was trying to do was important, but just didn't think that it was viable in the market. And that turned out not to be the case. But a large reason why I even got the chance to prove any of this was because people like you took the time to pay attention and to raise up a voice like mine. And like, I cannot describe how grateful I am for all of the opportunity that I've been given, and how, like, I don't know, how like phenomenal it has sort of felt to be trusted with writing, you know, super queer books for queer teens and their allies and their advocates. Like that's great. I love being that person. I don't know. This is like not coming out very articulate, but I let me be grateful and let me feel like I am contributing to the queerification of like the literature marketplace. I don't know. Like I have a lot of emotions right now, as you might expect, but ultimately I am just thankful that you're here. So thank you for reading me. Thank you for supporting me, and thank you for watching this video all the way to the bitter end. If you don't already have your copy of Reverie pre-ordered, definitely go grab this. I will be trying to sign as many as I can as I do events this summer and into the fall, so keep it handy if you're gonna come see me. I would love to sign it for you. And thank you for being the best readers an author could ask for. I love all of you. Mwah! Whew! Okay, all right. It is warm in here. Yeah, hardcover books can't do this. Could a hard... Nothing but you. Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. It got hot in here. Ooh, I have to water my plants. Oh my God. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm so bad. Oh no. Okay, all right. Here we go. Oh, hi. Anyone else?